Will. We've been waiting for one of us to break on through and make things happen in the dissertation phase, and he has clearly accomplished that, so it's excellent. And now we're going to get to hear what was it, something, put together something like 700 pages of written material before culling it down to a modest 400. What are we required, 200 maybe?
Yeah, 200.
Okay, all right, so he wrote a few dissertations just to make sure that it got through. And well, I'll just read from some of the, from this advice. Will Linn holds a BA in philosophy from the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, and a PhD in mythological studies, and I know this part, with an emphasis in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. In Carpinteria. His dissertation focuses, and what he'll be presenting from today, focuses on classical, Abrahamic, and scientific origin stories of knowledge, and is entitled Particles of Stone and Waves of Elixir, Western Origin Stories of Knowledge and Their Climactic Turns. And we can always expect some climactic turns with Will. There's always going to be an adventure in here, so look forward to that. His committee included Evans Lansing Smith, chair of Pacifica's PhD in mythology, Kieran Legreese, who chairs Pacifica's emphasis in archetypal studies, and Maria Tatar, chair of Harvard's Committee on Degrees in Mythology and Folklore. Will currently co-hosts a radio show he created for the Santa Barbara News Press called Mythosophia, in which he interviews leading story artists and scholars from such territories as myth and religion, sci-fi and fantasy, visions and dreams, rituals, novels, films, comics, and other storytelling formats and mediums. He is in his 4th year as co-founder host of this JCF Mythological RoundTable group.
Co-founder, co-host. These guys also co-founded and co-hosted with me.
Us two guys.
Can't get too much credit there on that one.
Very good. And hosted by the Ojai Foundation. And he writes the monthly newsletter for the 60-plus MRT groups around the world. Will holds a core credential from Harvard Business School and will begin teaching mythology to film students at Relativity Media's film school this coming fall. So, without further ado, welcome Will. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I haven't let myself do anything under this tree since we started, and Craig and Matt can tell you, since we started over there in the yurt, or one of the yurts, I've been wanting to do as much as possible under this tree, but we treated it with such reverie. We didn't cross the threshold of having anybody under the tree until it was Lance Smith, the chair of the Myth program, was the first to do it here for us, and that was a meaningful barrier crossing. And now is maybe the one time that I feel like it may be appropriate for me to speak under here. So I'm really excited to be in this space. Again, I want to thank all you guys for coming. My family's here, all of them, including Devin. Devin is always here. She's got the attendance award. She was here at the very first one, and has been, well, any of you that have enjoyed these roundtables, you owe a lot to Devin too. Thank you, Devin. So, I better stick to my notes or I can just go way forever. I'm just going to describe the project, a little bit of the history of the project, and then just to introduce what we're going to go through so everybody has their bearings all the time. And then I'm going to sit down when I start going through it. So the project, I've been kind of working on this since I was 17, and pretty crazy stuff happened, but short of it is I was introduced to Camus and Descartes showed me that I didn't know anything, and Camus showed me that I didn't understand purpose, and I definitely together knew that I did not know purpose. And so I got pretty dang lost, and eventually went through some interesting stuff. I had some seizures and all kinds of stuff, but the short of it is I was really present with the existential implications of materialism. And so as an undergrad, I was really focused on philosophy and science, but really beneath, I was pretty into materialism. It was what I was trying to study. And not because I liked materialism, but because I was very frustrated with its implications. In grad school, moving from philosophy and science, I moved into, of course, mythology, where I continued my study of materialism into myths involving materialism. So the dissertation itself is really a synthesis of not just my undergraduate work and graduate work, but also probably the deepest rupture in my own path. So this finishing this feels good because it's not just finishing a dissertation. It is both the climax of something I've been working on for so long and a liberation to move into new territories for me. I've been pretty tunnel visioned in this for quite some time. So for this presentation and for the dissertation, I've been very influenced by the scientific method, which is to present your hypothesis, go through the empirical data without any conversation of your hypothesis while you do it, then to re-examine the hypothesis based on the data. To do this for a myth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you my core hypothesis, then I'm going to tell you these stories, and I want you to forget about my hypothesis while I tell you the stories. I'm going to tell you the story of Adam and Eve. I'm going to tell you the story of Prometheus and Pandora. I'm going to tell you the story of Christ and of Hercules and of Einstein. These are great stories. Forget my hypothesis and just listen to them, and that will be the best way to for us to do justice to this project, to this conversation. Then I will return to the hypothesis at the very end, and we will check to see if how they did. We're going to stop about halfway through and to see where we are right now. So we'll stop at about just before 7, and we'll talk about, and we'll take a break and stuff. And then when we come, so the first section, I'm going to do the story of Adam and Eve and Christ, the story of Prometheus, Pandora, and Hercules. We'll take that break. We'll come back. I'll do the history of Western materialism from the beginning with Thales through to its rupture with Einstein. And then we're going to really dig back into the hypothesis in my thesis. Now, I'm going to introduce these core hypotheses for them to percolate. So the first hypothesis is that, I should say first, my topic of study are myths of knowledge. So the big focus for me was how can a myth convey knowledge, and more specifically, myths of knowledge. What knowledge do they convey? And so I looked at the story, the Abrahamic story of knowledge. So for the Judeo-Christian and Islamic stories, you have Adam and Eve. It's true. It's the origin story of knowledge for all of them, and Iblis as well. And we're going to talk about Satan's fall. For the classical tradition, from Greece all the way to Rome, and their extended world, you have the story of Prometheus and Pandora. That's their origin story of knowledge. And today, if you're not most influenced by the Abrahamic tradition or the classical tradition maybe, the scientific tradition is dominant in our culture, or is in a huge way. And so we'll be looking at that origin story of knowledge. And so my first hypothesis is that all of these three origin stories of knowledge have a certain consistency to them. That consistency is that they all convey an entry into a materialistic cosmology. I'll explain what I mean, but in essence, there's an entry into materialism, limitation to the body, limitation to material life, and we'll talk more about that. The second hypothesis is that as these stories continue, so Prometheus chained stone, eventually he's freed by Hercules. Most people just forget and just leave him stuck on the stone in their imagination. But the stories continue. The story of Adam also continues. The story of Christ is deeply embedded and interwoven with the story of Adam. And of course, the story of science continues. So the second hypothesis is that as the stories continue, there's an inversion of this original entry into matter and materialistic cosmology, and a transcendence from material limitation, which also means the limitation of the mind to matter. The third hypothesis is that this actual transition to make the switch, there's a certain fulcrum, a certain lever, and that specific point of switch, I believe, are fluids and waves. Symbolically, they show up as fluids, elixirs, and in science and physics, we're talking about waves. And I don't want to explain more of that until the end, but those are the three primary hypotheses. And so the core is that I believe that there is a consistent meta-narrative in the three core Western myths of knowledge, and that this meta-narrative conveys an entry into a materialistic cosmology, and then through elixirs enables a transcendence from material limitation. So, I'm going to do a little bit of combination of readings and storytelling, and I'm going to stop after each story and invite questions, and so we can move through a little bit together. Does anybody have any questions before starting the story? Thank you all again for coming. Some chapters I'll read more than others. I can say that that when I get to philosophy, I'm going to read a lot more in that chapter, and that'll be after the break. Aeschylus describes Prometheus as the patron of the whole human race. Carigné describes him as the immortal prototype of man. And Tarnas tells us that in the ancient mysteries, man had been symbolized as this great mythic figure. Like Adam, Heracles, and Christ, the main characters in this dissertation, Prometheus is a deity with which to identify. With this foundational frame in mind, we should dive deeper into the details of his story with an eye open to its commentary on the condition of human life and its mortal narrative. As we become increasingly immersed in this myth, we will find the classical benefactor of humanity to be more than a personification of human life. We will find that he has long served as a beacon for human spirit, such spirit as is required for creating art, fighting for freedom, pursuing new ideas, and stomaching the consequences of conscientious acts. He fought for Olympian order, then against Zeus' tyranny. When Aeschylus wrote Prometheus Bound, it was to Athenians who remembered the overthrow of their last tyrant and then the establishment of democracy, the two freedom wars against Persian tyranny. And when Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and Mary Shelley were writing about the figure of Prometheus, Frankenstein subtitled Modern Day Prometheus. So when Percy, Mary, and Lord Byron, when they were writing about the figure of Prometheus, it was to an audience that remembered the revolution of science from religious repression, as well as the French and American democratic revolutions against power-abusing monarchs. And the spirit of Prometheus is that rebellious insistence on the right to personal freedom, the desire to not be beneath or limited by the will of another. Fundamentally, this is the right to live, but is also the right to create, to learn, and, in Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, to love. As we will see, Prometheus is the man at the sunrise, the bringer of the fire, the spark, the exuberant creative force, that which brings inner light to outer expression, and the unwavering defender of our human right to this nature. We will find that as a Titan, he is more raw than the Olympians. But as his raw qualities include intelligence and ingenuity, his abilities to improve and refine are limitless. He is the opposite of static. In fact, as Tarnas describes it, progress is a Promethean enterprise. When Zeus chains him to stone, it is not only to punish his disobedience, but also to neutralize him. Because his rebellious nature and insistence on freedom, innovation, and the innovative spirit pose great threats to any regime that rules over the status quo. Change can require defiance and become rebellion, which many governments have historically avoided with exile and violence. When Zeus chains Prometheus, the tyrant chains the rebel, to the mountainside, we might also see Karl Marx being exiled. We might also see the Nazis driving artists from their borders. Or we might even see the Soviet Party banning We, which is a Prometheus Award-winning novel by Yevgeny Zamyatin. And I want to make this point. With the Brave New World in 1984, and by the way, you guys know Brave New World, probably some of it inspired on this very land, with Aldous Huxley's dystopian realities provide perfect examples of the ultimate Promethean nightmares, in which creativity, love, individuality, freedom, invention, and knowledge are completely denied by tyrannical leadership. So, now let me tell you the story of Prometheus. So, Prometheus' story begins when he creates humans. He makes humans out of clay. He really makes men out of clay, and later Hephaestus will make women. After he makes humans from clay, he comes to realize that the Titans ruling the world is a little bit tough for humans. I mean, titanic forces are both earthquakes and volcanoes, but they're also lust and greed and over-intense emotions. Neither of those types of titanic intensities are conducive to the human harmony that's required, the balance and stasis that's required for human life, especially for civilization as we know it. So he knows that the future means that the Titans have to fall, and he sees that Zeus is going to be the one leading the Olympians into this future. And so he sides with Zeus. He becomes Zeus's teacher. He is Zeus's mentor. He is the mentor of Zeus. And he is the one who shows them how to trap the Titans in the underworld. So after he shows Zeus how to trap the Titans in the underworld, Zeus rises to power. Zeus has taught him all kinds of stuff. And by the way, one of Prometheus, Pro-Metis, is related to the Metis, the mother Metis. The way Zeus got his wisdom is by eating Metis, wisdom. And then, of course, it's from that impregnation that Athena comes out of the head, is the daughter of Metis. But anyway, So Zeus kind of gets his Promethean wisdom, doesn't need Prometheus anymore, and so he is now ready to wipe out everything on the earth, start over fresh. We're going to have a flood, and Zeus is going to have his way. Mother Earth thinks this is garbage. Everybody in creation knows that Zeus is just being an egomaniacal ass, and he's going to start everything over in his way. Well, Prometheus, ever the rebel, as he rebelled against the Titans, and now he's going to rebel against the same people that he rebelled with. Always the rebel against the people that are against human freedom and human right to live. So he tells his progeny, Deucalion and Purah, to hide in a trunk or an ark, and this is how they survive the flood. Many of you are already wondering if there's a relation to the flood of Noah. Noah's son, his name is Japheth. Prometheus' father, his name is Iapetus. Those are definitely etymologically related. So keep that. So after the flood, Deucalion and Purah repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, and these stones become humans. And then everything seems to be going okay until finally there's a rift between the gods and men. They're having a feast at Macon. This is the name of the place. And to settle the rift, Prometheus comes up with this idea of the burnt offering. He cuts an oxen, splits it in two, and he takes all the... The problem is that the gods kind of want the good stuff. And if they get the good stuff, humans are not going to have anything to eat. It's going to be a big problem. Well, Prometheus, again, he's the savior of humanity. He's the progenitor. He's the benefactor. He's not going to have that, so he tries to trick Zeus. He tries to put all the bones and the stuff you don't want in the fat, which is delicious. And then over here, he puts all the meat and all the stuff humans can live on in a stomach, which is apparently the most disgusting part of the animal. So, Zeus is not fooled, but keep this in mind. Pretty on the outside, awful on the inside. Awful on the outside, pretty on the inside. That's a motif, a symmetry that will come back later with Pandora. So Zeus is not fooled, yet he takes the bait anyway for some reason. Probably to have a good excuse to punish humans and Prometheus, whatever it is. He even makes up some rumor about Prometheus going after Athena. Anyway, Zeus takes the bait and is very unhappy about it. He uses this as an excuse to steal fire back from humans. So now humans are without fire, and they're kind of hopeless. And that's a good word to use. So eventually, Prometheus, of course, this is the famous thing, he steals back the fire. And yes, it is retrieving a fire that was already taken from them. He didn't invent fire, he stole it back. And maybe he took it from the sun, maybe he took it from the hearth, maybe he took it from Ganymede. There are many versions. Maybe Athena helped him. Maybe he took it from Hephaestus' forge. Maybe he took it from the volcano that in the place where Hephaestus lives. He took the fire. And this fire is not just fire, it's the fire of knowledge, and it's very specifically also the fire of metallurgy. So he's the one who teaches humans all the crafts and all the abilities, language included. He teaches us everything we need for civilization. Except for humility, that's another story. It's a shame, sorry. It's Hermes that teaches us shame, otherwise we'd all be screwed. But otherwise, Prometheus gives us it all, and he brags about it. He's very proud. Zeus is not so happy about it, and this is a direct defiance to a tyrant's orders, and you can imagine what happens. Of course, he sends Hephaestus, Prometheus' own protege. He sends Hephaestus to go chain Prometheus to the stone. And he sends him to the eastern sunrise, to the edge of the world, the tallest mountain in Europe, Mount Elbrus, a dormant volcano. And of course, restraining the fire is also like the dormant volcano closing over the fire. And Prometheus Unbound also brings out the imagery of the exploding volcano, Mount Elbrus. Anyway, so while he's chaining him to stone, chaining him at the edge of the world. Now notice that it is the sunrise, the place where fire comes from. He is the fire bringer, the sunrise. And his brother, Atlas, who he fought, Atlas took the Titan side. He was the general of the Titans against Zeus. And so Atlas is there at the sunset, and he's holding up the heavens at the sunset. So these are two brothers, sunrise, sunset. And in one level, they are simply personifications of sunrise and sunset. Of course, on many other levels, they're far richer. So Prometheus is chained. That means he can't help humans. So Zeus now goes to his brother Epimetheus, whose name means hindsight. Prometheus means foresight. Think about foresight, technology, etc. So he tells Prometheus had warned Epimetheus, don't take anything from Zeus. Don't take any of his gifts. He's a tricky fella. And so anyway, Zeus talks Hephaestus into making Pandora. Now Pandora is the first objectified woman, literally made by a man for a man out of matter. She is an object. She's beautiful outside. All the gods give her gifts. She is not to be seen. She is, by Hesiod, who is a misogynist, she is positioned as the first woman. But we should be real clear that Prometheus had a happy wife, that Athena was a really important friend of his. They worked together. So it was not, so Prometheus, the problem is not misogyny here, even though Hesiod pushes it that far. Pandora is not just the first woman, and she may not, it's hard, I don't even want to call her the first woman because of where that takes us. She is a specific woman. She is a trap. She's a curse. She's beautiful on the outside, just like that glistening fat, and she's treacherous on the inside, just like what was hidden in the fat. So Zeus is playing the trick back on Prometheus. Pandora, after she marries Epimetheus, eventually they will have, she will open Pandora's box. Originally it was Pandora's jar, mistranslated centuries ago. And from that box comes all the despair and all the plagues and all the bad things that can happen to humanity. Everything except hope. Hope dangles. This image you might see as, well, first let me say, the woman, especially the wife, especially the mother, in ancient Greece, was highly associated with the vessel. You see images of the woman, the breasts on a vessel, literally, and stuff like this. So Pandora's jar has been many times has been interpreted as her own body. And Hope is the child that she gives birth to. And so you can see that Hope dangling on the body of the mother by the umbilical cord is mimetic with Prometheus chained to stone. The chain is his umbilical cord to the stone, just like the baby umbilical cord to the mother. Stone, mother, why would those be similar? Turns out, in Latin, for example, the word for mother and matter is the same, mater, M-A-T-E-R. And you see it in Greek tradition with Demeter, same word. So Gaia, the mother, the earth. Pandora, the personification of Gaia, the human version. So, and unfortunately the negative version. So the mother was very associated with matter. So the chaining of Prometheus to stone is very much like the child, the Hope, being chained to the mother. So, of course, there's nothing Prometheus can do, and now humans are entering into a phase of life and death, of bearing children. They have to work for food. The golden age is over, and this is a big part of the Hesiod myth. The golden age is over. Humans have got to work. They're living in a wasteland. They got to have children. It hurts. And the children make it even harder for the parents.
You noticed.
I noticed. So, but it's even worse if you don't have children, is what they say. So, double curse. You're totally in a rut. And Prometheus can't do anything. He's chained to stone. And so Hermes goes to Prometheus to rub it in a little bit. And Prometheus, he's a bitter guy about this. And he's like, look at what's been done to Titan. How could a god do this to another god, etc., etc. And what he eventually happens, he lets slip that he knows the prophecy of Zeus' downfall. Of course, Zeus is like, well, what is it? And he sends Hermes to do everything he can to get it out of him. Prometheus is willing to take all the punishment he needs to take to keep humanity safe. That's Prometheus. He will suffer. He will be the first person to fight for us and to suffer for us. That's what he represents. And so he doesn't tell, but Io comes along. Io was raped by Zeus. She has horns. She was associated with the cow and the moon. And so is the cycle of 14. And it's said that in 14 cycles and 14 generations, he tells her that she will have a child. His name will be Hercules, and he will set Prometheus free. And so we're going to switch over to that story now. Origin story is over. We've now left Prometheus chained to the precipice, symbolizing the state of humanity, chained to stone, estranged from everyone else and the gods. Eagle, by the way, starts eating out his liver because he refused to tell the prophecy. So, now, generations later, Hercules is born. Lots of cool stuff to say about Hercules. Not going to say it all. But he is a half-son of Zeus, brother of Dionysus. You know him for the 12 labors. One of the 12 labors was the quest for the golden apples. It was the 11th labor. And on the way to find the golden apples, he goes to, depending on the story, a few different characters that direct him to Prometheus. Say, if you need to find the golden apples, go to Prometheus. He's the one who can tell you. He goes to Prometheus. Now, earlier in the story, I got to set up something. One of the early trials, one of the early labors, was the Lernian Hydra. And to defeat the Hydra, you remember it's the one with the many heads, and every head comes off, comes back. He uses the firebrand, the gift of Prometheus, to defeat the Hydra. Then he uses the Hydra blood to free Prometheus. He takes his arrows, he dips it in the Hydra blood, but before we get to his freedom of Prometheus, there are 2 steps to freeing Prometheus. Both require the Hydra blood. The first is that accidentally he is visiting a centaur named Pholos, and they have a jar given to them by Dionysus. Dionysus' best wine. And centaurs are known for being pretty debaucherous, and they love their wine. Pholos is like, dude, he's like, if you open that, it's going to be a problem. All the centaurs are going to come wanting it. Heracles is like, don't tell me what to do. And he opens it, and all the centaurs come. And he has to fight to defend himself. He's shooting the arrows, and he chases them all the way, and the centaurs flee all the way to their mentor's hut. Their mentor's name is Chiron. And on the way, by the way, Chiron is also the mentor of Achilles. So they get to Chiron's hut, and accidentally Hercules shoots him in the knee. This wound, he's an immortal centaur, the immortal centaur, so he can't die. But he has this awful wound, and it's just bad, and he's in this awful state. So finally, now let's get back to Prometheus. When Heracles gets to the precipice to free Prometheus, nobody can kill the eagle. The eagle is impenetrable. The only thing that can kill the eagle is the blood on the arrows. So the Hydra blood arrows kill the eagle. Then he has to talk to Zeus. Hercules talks to his father and asks, can we set him free? And appeals. He makes an appeal. And Zeus says, only 2 things. One, there must be a replacement. And this is where Chiron comes in. Chiron comes in and dies in place of Prometheus. The part animal dies in place of Prometheus, who can return to union with the gods. So this gets into the whole old tradition of giving up the animal nature to become divine. Then, he also sells Prometheus, and this is something I wish I could say to every scientist in the world, every technologist there is. He says, I'll only set you knowledge, technology, fire, I will only let you free if you wear one of the chinks in the chain as a ring to remember restraint. Because you're going to be free, but you must remember the purpose of restraint if you're going to be free Prometheus. And he does. And so Prometheus is free. And then Hercules gets to ask, now how do I get to golden apples? And he sends him to Atlas, his brother. He takes the golden cup boat, and he rides the cup boat across the western ocean to the western island. And there he meets Atlas. And Atlas, because you can only get a golden apple if a titan gets it for you. But let me tell you what golden apple is. First of all, the word for apple in Greek was melon. I don't know how to pronounce it, but M-E-L-O-N. It means both apple and fruit. Apple wasn't into Mediterranean until well after this time period, right? Of this story starting. So we're talking about the golden fruit. Fruit is fruition. Remember, it's at the sunset, where the sun is ripe, where the day is ripe, symbolic of the ripeness of life. So the golden apple, the golden fruit, it's like it's your holy grail. It's that thing you must achieve. It's that thing you want to reach fruition. So Atlas gets the golden apples for him. And in this case, that thing he wants, that's very much bound up in the story, is immortality. So later, when Hercules does die, the Hydra blood comes back in again. The Hydra blood is in the inside of a cloak that his wife Dianara gives him, that she believes is going to be a love charm, but it's not. Actually, the cloak sticks to him, and he can't get it off, and he starts burning alive inside this cloak. The Stoics say that this bloody cloak is symbolic of the flesh, and that the reason why Heracles could die is because he had given up his heroic and pure divine self, marrying Dianara, who was symbolic of somewhat like Pandora, falls into the flesh, and that's why he died. Either way, when he knows he's going to die, he has himself burned alive on a pyre. Just like Christ's body is gone from the tomb, Hercules' bones are missing from the pyre. And there, and this is the end of the story, he marries Hebe, the cupbearer of the gods, and he drinks the elixir. His grail quest is over, and he becomes immortal, and he becomes one of the gods. And this is the story of the beginning of the paradigm shift from the origin story of knowledge, the chaining of Prometheus, the limitation of humans to this awful way of life, to then the liberation of Prometheus, the progenitor, and the transcendence of the exemplary human.
I need a
Yeah.
genealogy chart.
Yeah.
What is what are speculations and what the elixirs?
Well, the nectar. Corinne, so Dionysus is the god of wine, but before Dionysus was the god of wine, he was the god of mead. And honey was definitely in the Mediterranean, and honey alcohol was in the Mediterranean before wine. And that may very well have been what is related. And there are some other weird, so if they're all, or if this is an offshoot of the Indo-European tradition, which went east, because the Greek language is Indo-European, as is the Vedic language. In the Vedic tradition, soma is what they drank. And that was hard to be sure, but some people have argued a mushroom tea. Others have argued that it was something like ephedra that grew from a plant that they still call something like soma, which, by the way, is also where you get the word for Homer, Heoma. So Homer, in the Greek translation, is a blind man, but in the local Persian translation that was right on the border was elixir. So of the fruits of the nectar. So the nectar, I'm not sure exactly what it would have been. It probably played different roles. At one point in history, they would have called it wine, and another point in history, they might have called it a mead. But what you can say is that the word, N-E-K, is the prefix, and that is a prefix related to the underworld. We have a professor that's interested in what he calls the Nikia, the underworld journey. So nectar is basically the escape from the, it's like, I forget the exact translation, but it's either the putting off or the reversing of that underworld death. So it very much, nectar, even in its word, is like an immortality drink.
So Hercules was burned, and then he drank. How did he drink the elixir if his body was burned?
His soul transcended,
Okay.
and his phantasm. So his soul in heaven, and then his phantasm goes into the underworld, whatever that is.
What's a phantasm?
I don't know.
The unholy shit.
So we're doing good. That's about how long I thought this story would take. But anybody have any other questions? We still have a couple minutes if we're not in a hurry yet.
Do you have a historical period on that of the myth, like sort of when it started and how long?
Yeah, so Hesiod was writing in like 650, around then. Not far off from when Homer was writing. But one thing that's interesting about a myth is normally a myth is inspired by many stories. And I've come to see many stories that I'm almost certain are part of the Prometheus story. One of them for example, it was the who are the purple people? Why am I blanking?
What purple people?
Gosh.
The Smurfs?
No. Well, I'll think of it in a second. I'll think of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians taught Greek language.
Oh.
The Phoenicians taught Greek language. And they had this character named Promethei. And Promethei was involved with a certain constellation, Gemini. And he was also, the Phoenician gods, they say, all represented human achievements. So the Phoenician religion was very believed to have been somewhat secular and somewhat human-oriented, just like Prometheus' attitude. Prometheus' attitude is, if you've noticed, forget you tyrant religion god, forget you head of the state, I'm gonna, that's one thing I do wonder about.
So maybe from more ancestral religion
Well,
to
so-
Prometheus?
So I think that, I think there are several versions of this. So I can't get into all the histories that I think caused it, but I think this is one of these stories that influenced this, is the story of the sea people, is one of the ones, and the story of the Phoenicians influencing the Greeks, and also, there are many, many, many stories that I believe are being combined and distilled into this Prometheus story.
So you think the story is in fact an evolution?
Yeah, I think the story,
As-
and
as
I would
opposed to
say,
complete whole.
I treat all the primary sources, the oldest sources, with a certain appreciation. However, I consider Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, that was written in the Romantic period, just as primary and just as in touch with the essence of who Prometheus is and what he is as any of the others. I would consider it a crucial part of the evolution. And we should remember, by the way, that the story of Prometheus Unbound, written by Aeschylus, was the end of a trilogy. We only have this one. So, Prometheus Bound, the first of the trilogy. We only have this one.
So, the origin story where he gets bound to the rock, was that story definitely told in a pretty finished, polished up version with him being bound to the rock before the telling of the Hercules coming and released it?
That's hard to know. Actually, in Hesiod, there are sentences apart from each other.
The completion
Both
of the
things,
story.
yeah, it's both. But Hesiod's telling, like, he's just telling a whole, theogony. He's just laying out the whole history of everything. So, but another thing to note is that in that same area is the Georgian people have a god named Amirani. Amirani is buried in a cave in the top of Mount Elbrus, covered in chains. And he was also the one who stole fire from the gods and gave. So that one's probably a continuation. And then there are many other incarnations of the Prometheus story all throughout.
Will,
Yeah.
I real quick want to ask, when Heracles comes to unbind Prometheus, according to the Greeks who are hearing the story, has that already happened, or is that going to happen?
That's perhaps an unanswerable question. That's a really good question. That brings in the conversation of mythic time. It might even be argued that this happens every lunar cycle. Maybe this is symbolic of the round. And so while we might have a specific Prometheus, specific Hercules, this is still envisioned as a continuous round, a continuous cycle, I believe, just as much as it might sometimes be seen as a linear narrative. I think they're both true.
Cycle of generations or something?
Yeah, 14. He's 14 generations. That's the phases of the moon. I think 13, 14, whatever it is. I read that it's very related to the moon. Obviously, the original mother is Io, who wears the horns and is the cow and is symbolic of the moon. Which planet has Io as a moon?
Jupiter.
We'll go with that.
Jupiter?
Was it 14 also with the woman's cycle is 28 days?
That's
14
exactly
is
it.
the middle.
That's right. And actually, just to say this, and this is a good thing to move forward with. One of the coolest, oldest symbols I've ever seen is of a woman holding her belly, holding a horn. The horn has 13, 14 marks on it to symbolize the phases of the moon, which is the horn, as she's also holding her belly, which symbolizes. So this image demonstrates, like, it was so big that Newton, feeling the apple on his head, he saw, this is the gravity up there, gravity down here, bridging heaven and earth, this great bridge between heaven and earth. But that ancient symbol is symbolizing that same recognition of the bridge of heaven and earth.
Quick
Yeah.
comment, which is probably more synchronistic than anything, that the word in the Turkic, Turco-Altaic languages, the word for moon is also I.
Oh, really? That's really the Turkic. I'd love to talk with you more about that stuff. I think the Indo-European, Turkey is a very interesting place, and the Hittite culture is very confusing. Who were they? There's a lot of the Indo-Europeans came from where Prometheus was, the north of the Caucasus Mountains, where he was chained. This is where the Indo-Europeans started. We all speak Indo-European languages, from Hindi to French, Latin, all of them. They're all Indo-European languages. So the Indo-Europeans came down from and they were huge in the founding of metallurgy, historically, is related to Prometheus. So they come down from north of the Caucasus Mountains, and they spread east towards, and you have the Indo-Iranian, Indo-European Iranian languages, then going down into the Vedic languages, and then it goes west towards Greece, and then the next generation towards Rome, and then the next generation even further. And this is the Indo-European expansion, but we will maybe another time we'll talk about the Indo-Europeans.
That's also the place where wine was first invented.
Really? And that's fast. That's cool. Thanks. Okay, so let's do Adam and Eve. You guys are more familiar with this story. I'm gonna do again just a short reading at the beginning, especially short on this one. So, story of Adam and Eve in Eden has been perceived as a foundation and propagated as inspiration everywhere that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have become the dominant religion for at least some period of time. This includes a majority of the Middle East, Mediterranean, Western Europe, Russia, and the Caucasus, the Americas, South Pacific, Australia, and parts of Africa. Additionally, Christianity is growing in influence within China, Korea, and Japan. In all reality, there are few corners of the world that the Abrahamic mythologies have not reached and substantially influenced. According to Abrahamic traditions, the story is the account of first humans, first knowledge, and the inciting incident of life's labors. As such, the story of Eden has participated in the conscious and unconscious formation of thoughts, memories, and belief systems for thousands of years and billions of people. Unique versions of the story have been written by Jews, Christians, Muslims, Egyptians, Georgians, Greeks, Romans, Irish, and Englishmen. Americans like Mark Twain and Joseph Smith recorded variants. Some versions are highly religious, as in Genesis, the Quran, and the Christian books of Adam. Others are folkloric, like the Midrash and Talmud, or fairy tale-like, as in Hans Christian Andersen's Garden of Paradise. Examples like Canterbury Tales, Paradise Lost, The Divine Comedy, and the Saltaire Naran, Irish, blur the lines between epic poetry and religious myth. While a certain historic and religious weight will be given to the version found in Genesis, which is older than these others, this dissertation is especially interested in the unique nuances and repetitive qualities that the collection reveals. I've read all those versions, and the version I'm going to tell is somewhat of it's a conglomerate of all of them, and I will do my best to be responsible to point out where we're going from which places, stuff like that. So, before the fall of Adam and Eve, as Zaman taught me a couple of years ago, was the fall of Iblis, the fall of who we in the West or in the Christian tradition in America, we know more as Satan. It's a more familiar term, but and I wouldn't want to oversimplify and call Iblis exactly Satan either. But
How do you spell that?
Iblis, right? Yeah.
Yeah, double ES or triple ES.
So so there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually ask Zaman after I get through this if he wants to add a note or two or a note on this part of the story, because he's really an expert on this. I interviewed him on this topic on Mythosophia. So if you're really interested in Adam and Eve, I recommend especially the Islamic version and especially a mystical interpretation. I recommend that interview. So Iblis is a jinn. He's a fire creature. He's made of fire. Adam is made from earth. In some versions, he's made from all the elements. But in this story, it's important that he's also specifically made from earth, because as a fire creature, what fire creature would want to bow to something lower than itself, that is earth? I've got to say another part first. One day, the angels, who had never defied God, somebody went around asking what would happen if somebody disagreed, defied, or went against God. And maybe more nuanced, detailed than that. But Iblis, who is like the closest to God at this point, is like, that would be disaster, awful, and horrible things. And I think he says they should be banished, punished. And so later, Iblis, after having said this, is asked to bow to Adam, the creation of the first human who's made from earth. And again, he's made of fire, and he's like, why would fire bow to earth? I'm older, he's younger, why would the old bow to the young? I'm God, you're God, I want to bow to you, and he's a man, why would I bow to him? But the problem is, these are all reasons for him not to bow to Adam. See, the problem is he disobeyed God when he asked him to do it, and then when God asked him, why didn't you do it, he gave him reasons. He gave him excuses. That's not what happened to Adam and Eve. They might have shifted the blame a little bit here and there. But they're basically sorry and repentive and beg for forgiveness. And that's not what Iblis does. So Iblis is banished to hell. And in this Islamic version, this is Islamic, but also the Milton English version. He heavily influenced. Zaman has taught me is influenced by this Islamic version. And in Paradise Lost, which I recommend a million times over, wonderful book. In Paradise Lost, Satan is also sent into exile. So these are Christian, Islamic, but then also in the Jewish version, you know the story of the angels coming and mating with the humans, and they teach them fire, and they teach them skills, all types of skills, and this is at the top of Mount Hermon. Of course, disaster happens, and these big problems from the offspring, and these become the fallen angels in the Jewish tradition. So this is the Jewish version of these fallen angels. Beelzebub's in there. So now let's go back to Satan and Iblis. Satan. Now we're going to call him whichever one and get blurry with it. And all of his minions, his fallen angels, are in hell, and he wants out. So he escapes from hell to make a long story short, and he crosses the great void of darkness, searching, and he sees heaven closed up, and he sees earth hanging like a pendant, like a fruit, and he decides he's going to pluck it. And his way to get back at God is through humans. So he goes, he finds his way to Eden, and he can't get in. There are many different versions of how he gets in. In some versions, Eve lets him in. In some versions, it's this weird bird. In some versions, it's a peacock. In the Islamic version, it's a peacock who symbolizes pride. So it's pride that allows Iblis in. And in another version, it's the snake who's literally talked into letting him share his body. Whatever the case, he gets in. Meanwhile, as you know, Adam's been created in the image of a creator, his creator, from clay, brought to life by breath. And I just want to pause to point out that saying that the clay was brought to life by breath implies that body had no life until the breath. The breath and the body are separate. The life, the soul, and the body are separate. Similarly, in the Prometheus story, he makes humans from clay, and then it's Athena often gives him a light that helps bring them to life. So the life is separate from the body, and this is really important to my thesis. And that's the last thing I'll do that's really important to my thesis. But do note, brought to life by the breath. Of course, Eve is brought to life from his rib, or his tail, or his face, depending on the version of the story. And depending on the version of the story, she is there to be his helper slave, or his ultimate pleasure and bliss in this world. Whatever the case, she's seduced by the serpent to eat the fruit that they've been, told not to eat. So they're naming all the animals, talking freely with the animals in some versions, and Eve is seduced into eating the fruit. She's convinced that she won't surely die, that she'll get the knowledge of the gods, and that it's going to be good to eat. And of course, she seduces Adam. He comes to eat, and then they hide. They cover their shame, and this is where the overlap between the original sin, the first food, and also the first sex, the things that will cause mortal life, eating and sexual mortality. These are the crucial cycles. So whenever you see the fig, for example, in the Sistine Chapel, it's a fig tree. Nobody knows which tree, right? It's a big debate which tree, but sometimes it's represented as a fig, and when it is, I think it's not just a big dick joke because it's the biggest leaf in the nature, but I think it's also to represent sexuality, because the fig is highly associated with sexuality, and to go into that would be quite a tangent. So they're hiding, they're ashamed, they're hiding double, they're hiding their bodies with clothes, they've seen their own skin, they realize, I'll come back to that. God comes, why are you hiding? Right? And then, of course, Adam says, what happened? Did you eat the fruit that I commanded you not to eat? Adam says, oh, she gave it to me and she told me to eat. She says, oh, the serpent gave it to me. He told me to eat. And then, of course, come the three curses. He curses the serpent to crawl on his belly. If he had legs, they're gone after that. He eats dust from then on. He bites at the heels of humans, and humans stomp their heels on his face. The woman, cursed to childbirth, to labor pains. The man, cursed to labor in the field. As again in the Prometheus story, the dual labor curse. Laboring for food, laboring for children. Man labors for food in the field, and it's no good, and it's really hard, and it's really, really hard. She labors for children, and that's really, really hard, and it hurts a whole lot. And this is crucial symbolism of the fallen state. Now in the Christian retellings of the story, which, by the way, when they were first becoming popular, it was believed that they were from 400 BC and that they were prophecies of Christ. But now most scholars are convinced they're from after Christ, and they're like post. You write the prophecy after it's already happened, kind of thing. And in these stories, they're still the oldest Christian stories of Adam and Eve. Books of Adam they're generally summarized as Cave of Treasures. And by the way, some of these stories, the Georgian Book of Adam, come from the Caucasus. But anyway, So these stories, in these stories, they're exiled, and in the Islamic story, Adam and Eve fall, and they're separated from each other, and it's epic when they come back together. In this Christian version, in these Christian versions, they enter into the Cave of Treasures. And when they enter into the Cave of Treasures, it's dark, they cannot see, very much like Plato's cave, and their senses start to change, and they start talking about how much their senses are changing, and they've gone from being able to see the divine to now only being able to see the material world. All their senses change. And then their organs change, and they go from being able to eat the fruit of Eden to only being able to eat material food. And then sexuality, then they have children. And the woman becomes a mother, and she has Abel. And the first child becomes the first murderer, reinforcing again and again and again the infinite connection between birth and death. Then this story concludes with Adam and Eve both being buried, sometimes separately, sometimes together. And Adam is there left buried. Now, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims all just tell the story of Adam's burial, and they all tell it in a different place. And this is where I have to be honest and say that the story shifts into a more Christian myth than the others, because I can't follow the rest down this road. Because I'm going to now go into the Christian, what happened. I will note a couple things later, but